coming from Chinese culture, which was an atheist culture, and then having my own spiritual transformation, especially 2 years ago when I, tried ketamine therapy, when I felt I broke through this veil and saw much greater and saw beyond. So that really transformed my perception of my existence.
I want to protect muscle over the expense of, hanging my hat and saying, oh, I did a 4-day fast, because I agree with you. It's as much a mental exercise as a physical one. And so if you feel like you're really, like your mood is suffering, you don't feel good, break your fast.
I like your, rule of thumb as far as what diet is good for you is to see how you feel.
Yep.
I mean, that's really the bottom line.
So here we are in the living room or the office studio. Dr. Joy Kong, Cynthia Thurlow, traveling from across the country to meet with us. And I am so honored to be here with these two high-powered ladies. And we decided we're going to talk about all kinds of things, especially health-related matters. But I love your chit-chat starting out question about how you got here, and especially transitioning from that previous career in the medical scene. So I'd love to know.
Yeah, I tell everyone that my transitional path was not necessarily one I would encourage people to replicate, because I went from being a practicing clinician in a busy cardiology group to literally taking a leap of faith and telling my husband one day, I was like, I can't write another prescription. I feel so constrained in this current medical model, and the only way to get out of this and do what I really want to do is to leave. And so without a business plan, literally without a business plan, I gave my notice, and on April 1st, 2016, I left clinical medicine and started my own business. And almost instantaneously, I had women coming to me that wanted to talk about exactly the things we were all dealing with, like, why you weren't sleeping, why you were having weird cravings, why you suddenly were weight loss resistant. And that grew into group programs and one-on-one work. And then a few years later, a colleague wanted to do a podcast, and I reluctantly agreed, and then that grew into Everyday Wellness and then another podcast and more speaking opportunities. But I say all the time, I draw upon all my medical experience almost every day, but I now get to talk to people about what I think is most important, which is lifestyle.
Yeah. Well, you had to do a lot of self-educating, going from cardiology to helping women with day-to-day problems. So that's going to take a while.
It definitely does. And what's interesting is, life imitates art. So certainly for me, when I was in my early 40s, all of a sudden I was becoming that exact person. And my GYN, the only thing that were offered to me was, okay, let's go on oral contraceptives. Let's put in an IUD. Let's do an ablation, or let's just do a hysterectomy because you're done having kids. And I was like, time
mutilation.
out. Yeah, exactly. I was like,
was that
time
four
out.
choices? None of them sounded too good.
No.
Okay.
And so I said, I think I'm good. And so that then started this kind of self-exploration about perimenopause and this super sexy topic that not only are very few physicians and NPs and other providers trained in, but very few people are really shining a lot on how women are supposed to age in a way that allows them to have some dignity and not feel like they're effectively told, this is just the way things are, because I heard that. And I was so discouraged. I thought, if I'm hearing that, everyone else is hearing that. And so kind of changing the narrative so that people can age with dignity. I mean, really, that's what it comes down to. Women don't have to gain 30 pounds, be inflamed, and be miserable. Like, there are ways to navigate these years and then into menopause without feeling like you're like an alter ego of your former self.
Yeah.
Joy, do you have any interest in this subject? In fact, during our podcast, I think you said you got tired of writing prescriptions, and that's when you were, heading off into the longevity space. So, wow, the synergy here. But, I think the biggest question is, why is it still such a disaster with all this great information and progress, both in the progressive medicine as well as just the mainstream medicine of going in those four choices, when clearly there's enough, support for people taking a different route? Both of you are going to have to answer this, because you're working hard every day to try to change it, but it's kind of ridiculous how the pharmaceutical industry and the powers that be are vested in keeping people on this line, but I can't think of any other good reasons.
Yeah, I feel like we're kind of at a time of war almost, fighting against the juggernaut that's been the traditional, the whole medical practice since the early 1900s. So there's this shift, an almost violent shift, even though people may not realize it, but there has been integrated doctors who have died. mysteriously. And I mean, look at what happened recently with this, infection, and how much it's dividing the population. So I think we're at a pretty critical juncture where there's a shift, and the establishment really doesn't want this shift to happen because they were doing pretty well by keeping people sick. And who are we to come along all of a sudden getting people off medications or preventing them from ever getting on medications? That's very bad for business. So, so we have to, kind of be the champion. But I think because the masses are waking up, it's really interesting. I think there's a shift in consciousness that people are waking up, and this has become a grassroots movement. Because when I first came to this country 30 years ago, if I had mentioned acupuncture, people would look at me sideways. They would think that's pretty weird. And then, 15 years later, it's covered by insurance. So there's this huge shift that's happening. I don't think the medical giant is going to be able to stop it. That's what's funny. They're trying to stop it, but they can't.
Yeah, I think in a lot of levels, traditionally trained allopathic providers, we're taught to address symptoms. That's how we're trained. The symptoms. Then there's algorithms about how specifically to address chest pain, shortness of breath, vaginal bleeding, whatever it is that's going on, versus a functional, more integrative approach, which is what I think we both really embrace, and really looking at individuals as bio-individuals, really looking at the contributions of lifestyle. Obviously, we all speak to high quality sleep, nutrition, etc., but that's not what we get reimbursed for. If you're in a traditional model. So there's there's this perception that there's no value there. In fact, I had several colleagues, and everyone was very supportive of my desire to talk about nutrition, but they were like, oh, this is our nurse practitioner, and she really likes to talk about food. And it was always with that kind of snarky. And I said, it all starts with food. Like, so much of what we're addressing in cardiology, as one example, is a byproduct of, dysfunction in people's personal lives. Like, I would have patients, they were like 35 years old, they're on 3 meds for high blood pressure, they're on diabetes and cholesterol medications, and I'm like, if I could get you to stop smoking, if I could get you to move your body, if I could get you to eat lower carb and more protein and sleep, you might not need all these things. And they're like, no, just give me the pill, I don't want to change. And so we've kind of created this perfect storm where we are a very metabolically unhealthy population. We are potentiating, and it's certainly the pandemic has not helped metabolic health. And so, I agree with you that we're seeing emerging voices that are coming out and speaking against this kind of traditional model and saying, like, we can exist in the same space, but we need to do a better job with prevention. We need to do a better job with chronic disease management. If there's an emergency or an urgency, allopathic medicine is your person or your entity.
Thumbs up.
I had benefited from that.
We got some appendixes removed right here. Thank you to those surgeons.
Exactly.
It does seem like there's two things here. It's battling against the mighty beast and all the money and all that. And then there's that personal responsibility aspect, which, that was Mark Sisson's opening motto of his blog, however many years ago, that it's up to us to take personal responsibility for our health. And that seems like we're not getting a good grade in Western life here on that note too. We're getting a C- or something. It's like everyone knows about sleep. Everyone knows that junk food's bad for you. And for some reason, I feel like, tremendous fear and desperation that I don't want to suffer and decline and have people taking care of me and not remember the names of these people that are taking care of me. So I'm like super motivated just on that alone. Forget about a high jump competition that I think I'm going to win pretty soon, but where's the psychology of the average person that is popping these? What's the average number of prescription? I think it's 17 or 13.
We used to have
the average
contests.
American has 17. Yeah. I have 0, so now it's actually 17 point something. I don't know about you guys, but maybe everyone under 17, thumbs up. But what a disaster! And are they thinking about anything, or they just don't give a crap and they want their personal freedom and their mobile device? And so
I think it's a degree of cognitive dissonance. I don't think it's that people don't per se want to make better choices. I think they're lost. They don't get good guidance when they go see their healthcare provider. There's so much misinformation online that is propagated by social media influencers, sometimes the media, sometimes well-meaning healthcare practitioners. But I think on a lot of levels that we've made it hard for people to make changes. I think if you're intrinsically motivated, yes, you can make those shifts. But I think the average person needs a lot of support, a lot more than they get in a 5 or 10 minute office visit. And, you know, the other thing is that a lot of these functional integrative medicine practices can be cost prohibitive for like everyone. And that's something that I feel like I have to be honest. Like I'm fortunate, we are all fortunate that we can, you know, we have the ability to pay for those kinds of services, but not everyone does. Because people reach out to me online all the time. They're like, oh, I can't afford this or I can't afford that. And I'm like, I understand, but you could right now do like these 3 things that could have a huge net impact on your life while you're figuring out how to find a practitioner that's more aligned with what you need, because they are out there. It's just trying to find them.
Yeah, you can't afford to eat at the highest level of sophistication and recommendation, but I'm also going to call BS on a lot of that, because we're going to go look at your receipts for your pizza deliveries,
choices,
and, you know, the stuff that's in your discretionary
Uber
income.
Eats.
But working within a lack of affordability of some of the stuff that's touted by, seems like there's a lot of potential there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I don't agree with, because I've treated a lot of psychiatric patients who are, you know, in the indigent population, and they will come to me saying, I can't afford to eat healthy. I said, I lived in San Francisco and I spent $60 a month on my food, and I ate super healthy. So yes, you can. You just have to pick the right food. You don't go buy McDonald's and you know, buy donuts. You pick. You have to be smart about it, but don't tell me that you can't afford it. So, yeah.
Don't get her started.
No, I think
point.
it's really, it's choices. So that's the big thing. Like we say all the time, we have teenage boys, and so we're a very protein centric family. And I have my 17-year-old who's 6 feet tall, can eat a massive amount of protein in a sitting. And I just say there are choices we make as a family to prioritize our nutrition over other things. And so people sometimes are surprised. I'm like, no, this is just what we prioritize. And so, you know, when you're right, when you start talking to patients or clients and they start identifying, yeah, I'm doing Uber Eats, and oh yeah, I mean, I spend $300 a weekend in the bar, and I'm doing, you know, a lot of these other things. It's like just collectively figuring out, like, let's be real about where our money goes. Like even if you just trend your spending habits for a month, you might be very surprised to know that there are things that changes you can make that will enhance your healthy living.
And then we have the challenges, and I'd like to go back to that misinformation you mentioned. Which are the ones that really bug you the most, where these well-meaning people are dispensing the information that they deeply believe in, and it could be less than optimal by other people's opinion. And that's going to lead to another question, where these forks in the roads are here now, and some people don't trust stem cells and think it's woo-woo, and then other people have had complete life transformation. Tony Robbins, one of them, where he couldn't lift his shoulder, whatever, all these amazing stories. And so, like, we're rolling the dice and betting our lives on whether plant-based is the way to go or whether the animal-based is the way to go, and those are disparate, along with many other things. But what are some of the hot ones that you see that bug you and you're trying to fight back against?
I would say for me personally, it's the advice that I was trained in, was that you meal frequency and snacks, you eat frequently to stabilize your metabolism and your blood sugar. I would say that's probably number one. And then vilifying fat. I think that has created a lot of misinformation, and to the point where I'm still telling my 76-year-old mother that yes, you can have some avocado and some nuts. It is not going to make you gain a ton of weight, but if you keep eating these inferior fats, that is like seed oils, that can be problematic. I would say that, and you know, the vilification of, you know, protein. More often than not, what I see is people eat too many of the wrong types of carbs, too much of the toxic seed oils, and not enough protein. And so that can be the perfect storm for a lot of
I want to ask you about the protein, because people are confused. How much protein do I really need? And so there's wide variations. So how some people think we're over-proteined, you know, like we're just like overconsumption.
Some very highly trained, highly respected people.
Some people say you got to hit, you know, 120, 150 grams of protein. So what's your thoughts on that?
It's a great question. I am of the belief system that we are designed to continue to eat. Well, first and foremost, as we get older, our protein intake needs actually increase because we don't break down and assimilate protein as readily as we do as younger people. So I come from the camp that you want at least 100 grams of protein a day, largely because our protein needs increase, but also this whole concept of muscle protein synthesis, how important muscle is. Muscle is the organ of longevity. The more muscle mass we maintain, the more insulin sensitive we are. And so from my perspective, I really, really, really encourage my patients and clients to be hitting those protein macros. Now, the average woman that I work with is probably consuming 40 grams of protein a day. So that's a huge difference.
Is that a health conscious person that's coming to you typically?
They just don't know.
But I mean, you're not talking about someone off the street. You're talking about someone that's hired a coach and is really caring about their diet before seeing you. And so they're having their salad, their fasting period, their
teeny tiny piece of chicken.
Right.
Their protein bar, their protein shake. So I think there's a lot of misinformation. And obviously, I was going to say, looking at the longevity experts, David Sinclair, Walter Longo, obviously they are talking about very small amounts of protein. But I always say the people that I follow, lean into their research and really talk to thoughtfully, they are the kinds of musculature and health that I want to aspire to be. So do I want to just be skinny? No.
Well, what about looking at centenarians? How much, because obviously they've made it, through a long period of time and with good mentation and good physical capabilities, they may not be as muscular as what you would like, but they're living a good life. So they don't overconsume protein, right? I mean, they consume a very moderate amount.
Well, I think it's a twofold issue. They're also typically very mobile and they're very active. They're probably getting enough sleep. They're probably managing their stress, all of which can be very impactful. I think I come from the perspective that the research that I'm familiar with and that I'm well vested in really encourages people to lean into that protein intake. I think that we live in a highly kind of toxic world in terms of, the way that my grandparents ate food and the way they lived is very different than my parents and my generation and my kids' generation. And so really with the understanding that we have most people that are growing up now are so metabolically unhealthy that they're already setting themselves up. I mean, you've got rampant amounts of insulin resistance and diabetes in young children, at rates that we didn't see even 20, 25 years ago. So from my perspective, I think that the whole piece of protein is really an important one. It helps with satiety, helps with hormone production, and just really understanding that for each one of us, it's fine-tuning what we're doing. It doesn't mean that you go from eating 40 grams to 100. It may be that you diligently work towards just eating more protein with your meal. So you're going to help with satiety. And the other thing that's really interesting, there's a lot of emerging research for women in menopause that if they're not hitting this threshold for muscle protein synthesis, their body will be looking for them to get more calories in, and it's going to come at the expense of carbohydrates and fat. So a lot of the women, when I'm working with them and they're saying, when you start restructuring your macros, restructuring your protein, fat, and carbohydrate intake, they're stunned. They're like, oh, I don't want to eat after dinner anymore. I'm not looking for snacks. I'm not looking for sugary foods. And a lot of it's because they just don't hit those mechanisms, specific hormonal mechanisms in the body when they're hitting those protein macros. So I encourage people to at least experiment, to be open-minded to the possibility that they're not eating enough of protein. I find even when I travel, I have to struggle with that. Like this morning, I had an omelet and I had 2 pieces of sausage, and then there was a charcuterie thing that I ate some of that, and I was like just hoping to hit like 40 grams of protein in a meal just to kind of feel satiated till I eat dinner.
Talk about that protein leverage theory that you're hinting at. Really fascinating, where the brain is really knows about protein needs and will desperately look for them.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's this complex in a relationship, and I can really just speak to women, between this follicular stimulating hormone and low estradiol, so low estrogen levels. That's part of when this muscle protein synthesis issue becomes an even larger issue for menopausal women. Like as women are getting closer to the 12 months without a menstrual cycle, they are at greater risk for putting on more adipose tissue, for being less metabolically flexible. And this paper, which I can pull out for you guys if you want me to, I don't have it with me, but I have it at home, really shows this complex in a relationship. That's why it's so important to be aiming for 40 to 50 grams of protein with your meals, because your body is desperately looking to help maintain trying to maintain muscle, because sarcopenia is a real issue. It's not a question of if but when, unless you're working diligently against it. And I see far too many women who are just fixated on being a certain size or a certain weight at the expense of maintaining muscle mass.
Is there any statistics about protein intake, high protein intake, and longevity, like overall long-term health?
Not that I can pull off like the top of my head right now, but I do have quite a bit at home. And I think if you look at the big longevity researchers, if you look at David Sinclair, you look at Walter Longo, they talk about low protein. They're eating like one meal a day. They're doing a lot of prolonged fasts. And this is something, even during the launch of the book this year, a couple podcasters would ask me, like, which camp are you in? And I said, I'm all about longevity, but I'll be honest with you, not at the expense of losing muscle mass. Because losing muscle mass to me is much more important, because that's going to help me maintain insulin sensitivity. And that becomes a greater concern. And so I always say respectfully, because I have great respect and reverence for both of them, I just say I'm glad that they're doing the research, but if you only eat one meal a day, you're not getting enough protein in, unless you're a unicorn. And we have a unicorn friend, you know who I'm alluding to. We eat a massive amount of protein in a short window. But most people just can't get 100 grams of protein in one meal. That's really unusual.
Yeah, and the average listener who's not living and breathing this stuff can get very confused, even with the last several minutes of conversation. The most highly respected people are saying to get to that finish line, you need to have your lentil soup and meditate and shuffle through the garden until you're 108. And I'm also thinking there's another layer here of the quality of life and what you're doing. And if you want to be out there hiking and stand-up paddling and doing high jumping and being active and energetic, I don't think it's in dispute that muscle mass and muscle strength is going to be your key to hanging in there a long time, rather than succumbing to sarcopenia, which is, it's a disease, it's a definition, but it's the norm. So like we have the norm of sarcopenia, and then people who are outliers, unicorn, whatever, that are keeping the muscle mass on rather than spinning down the drain. So you asked a great question, which no one knows the answer to, which is who's going to beat Jeanne Calment's record? Jeanne Calment lived to be 122. She died in 1997, a French woman. I think it's going to be me. That's why my password and my number is 123. It's as easy as 123. That's going to be the new record, 123. But I want to get there through this wonderful, amazing, active, energetic life, rather than seeing how long I can shuffle through the garden and sit on the meditation cushion for 2 hours every morning and have my lentil soup for my one meal a day. That aside, to try to sort through this confusion, if we can hit this point a little further, could it be that a lot of the boilerplate of the life's work of these great scientists and things like that are coming from studies of a sorry-ass, inactive, junk food eating population? Because we're going back to the lipid hypothesis of heart disease as well, where it's like that cholesterol, you're eating too many eggs, you're going to get a heart attack. That's not untrue, that this could be contributing along with the pile of processed carbs you eat every day. So this protein argument that you want to minimize that so you don't overstimulate mTOR and these growth factors, seems to me that let's find some healthy athletic females at 50, 60, 70, 80 and look at their lifestyle and what they're doing and how much protein they're consuming if they're keeping their muscle mass on. Same with males.
Yeah.
Well, besides that, there's no dispute or disagreement in the scene yet.
Well, and it's interesting. So yesterday, the city that I live in now, there's no direct flights anywhere. So I had to fly to Chicago. And of course, there was an icing issue. And so the flight didn't take off when it was supposed to. And I had a very tight connection. So needless to say, we landed in Chicago 30 minutes late. Well, actually an hour late. My plane is boarded. It is in 2 terminals over. And there were 5 of us. We sprinted 1.25 miles. Now, 1.25 miles sprinting without luggage is probably not all that bad. But I had luggage. I had a heavy overpack bag. I had a bigger bag than you see over there. And when I tell you I was the last person on the plane, I made it on the plane. And I was the last person on the plane. I remember thinking, what do most average Americans do? They miss their flight because my chest was burning because I was really a full-on out sprint as gracefully as I could with some bags. And I kept reminding myself, what is the average person doing? I was the last person on the plane. They held the plane for us 5 schmucks to make it over 2 terminals. But understand, the average American would not have been capable of doing that. And I'm 51. I'm not a spring chicken, but it is definitely one of those things I think about every day. I want to maintain my health because I want to be able to get off the toilet. I want to be able to sprint if I ever have to do that again. I want to be able to have a high quality of life, because I'm sure for all of us, our experiences, you see a lot of people who have not had a high quality of life. I saw 50-year-olds that couldn't get off a bedside commode, or couldn't walk a mile, let alone run a mile. And so you just start to understand that quality of life piece is really important, irrespective of where we are in time and space.
Yeah, I do have patients who struggle with the protein intake. They're like, how am I going to cram, with my body weight, I'm going to have to cram in, 150 grams of protein every day, and it's very challenging.
It is, and that's why I would say 100 grams, work towards 100. Like I say, don't stress about 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight. Just work towards 100. And if I say that, then people kind of go, okay, maybe I can do that over time.
So just to give people an idea, a little piece of serving size steak in a restaurant, how many grams of protein is that?
Typically, if you've got an 8-ounce steak, it could be over 50 grams. So that's what people don't realize, is that it adds up. And you can always ask for more protein. I'm the person in the restaurant that's like, this is not enough protein on my salad. Can I have some shrimp? Can I have some steak? Can I have some chicken? Granted, you pay for it, but you're going to get closer to that threshold. And depending on the individual, I have 2 large boluses. That sounds terrible. Large boluses of protein a day, and that's how I know, and that's how I hit 100 grams. But do I have days where I have less? Yes. Some days, if I'm traveling, it gets more challenging. I had them send me 2 burgers last night. I was like, okay, it's a third of a pound. Send me 2, and that'll be enough. And the guy was like, no bun, nope, no cheese, nope, just send me the burgers and a salad, and I'm good. But I do agree with you. It can be daunting when people are trying to make those changes, when they're so under proteined and under muscled that it's overwhelming to think about how they go about doing that. And the other thing is, as we are going through andropause and menopause, it becomes more challenging for people to maintain muscle mass. And so you do work at a little bit of a hormonal disadvantage. It doesn't mean it's impossible, but you have to work a little harder at it than you did maybe in your 20s and 30s.
Yeah, you got parallel tracks now. We need to eat more protein, and then we need to go use our muscles so that we can utilize the protein.
Yeah.
But then you're also an expert in intermittent fasting, right? So if you want to combine intermittent fasting with adequate protein intake, you're really juggling.
Yeah, it definitely is. And that's why I'm not a fan of lots of prolonged fasting, especially for lean people, and there are plenty of them, because you start to worry about, breaking down what muscle mass you do have, which is why I personally don't fast for any prolonged amount of time. My last big fast was in 2019, and I'll never have another.
Was that 17 days or something?
That was 13 days in the hospital.
Yeah.
Oh, you involuntarily.
Not on purpose, if we put it that way.
So I jokingly say I will never do another long fast, because that cured me of any desire to ever go through that. But I think it kind of really speaks to the fact that we all struggle with trying to get enough protein, especially if you're in a constrained feeding window. That's why I'm not a fan of OMAD as a sustained strategy. I think that, most people need 2 boluses of protein in a feeding window. And so whether that's a 6-hour, an 8-hour, or 12-hour, depending on the individual, it's really working around those constraints and understanding that that's going to increase the likelihood you can meet those thresholds. And the other thing is, protein and healthy fats can go together in a protein. You could have a ribeye steak, you'd have a piece of salmon. People worry a lot about healthy fats, and I'm like, listen, they're in a lot of the protein that you're eating already. So it's not like you have this massive piece of salmon and then you need half an avocado. No. But it's the carbohydrates that I think are most confusing for most people. They're like, I don't know what to eat. I don't know if I should be low carb, high carb. Which carbs are good, which ones are bad, and I think a lot of that's dependent on your insulin sensitivity.
Yeah, we had a whole conversation about the carbs. So Brad has changed his approach from very low carb to incorporating a lot of carbs. And I see 2 camps of people who are doing really well, which is the high carb, low fat, and the low fat, high carb. The high protein, the high protein, high fat. Yeah, very low carb. So
like a keto type approach.
Yeah, versus a complete plant-based.
They're trying to be fat fueled, and then we have people on the other side, I guess, high carb, and then watching their fat would be a characterization of vegan vegetarian, perhaps.
Yeah, and
all by comparison.
And it is challenging. So which camp would you fit in, right?
It's not a big deal. We're just betting our life on it again. Yeah.
for a patient who just, going on regular, American diet, and then for them to be facing, should I try the high carb? Because some people do really well, high carb, very low fat. But then some people are really great, doing what, keto-ish diet.
I'm so worked up about this. I'm gonna jump in with a big picture answer here because I interact with real people who are not living and breathing health and fitness and diet, and I think we can't even start talking about any of it until you get that crap out of your diet and start choosing nutritious foods. And then perhaps you can thrive with what I call a super high risk diet, which would be vegan, plant-based. I mean, people are doing it, they're making documentaries about it, whatever, but I'm going to say it's high risk because you're excluding the foods that have served human evolution for 2.5 million years, and people are thriving with strict keto, strict carnivore, whatever, because they are getting a nutrient-dense choice of foods. But as long as the processed foods are out of it, particularly the seed oils, then we can start to converse and figure out how to optimize. But I think it takes me back to this concern with insufficient protein intake. Would a person eating an average Western diet with a lot of processed foods, are they at risk, or is this mainly a challenge for people who have already cleaned up their act and are having the salads and the kale smoothies and the little snacks of a handful of walnuts and not trying to just slam fast food, or is kind of everyone at risk?
I think everyone's at risk. I mean, obviously, if you're consuming highly processed, hyper-palatable foods that have got
sugar and fat,
corn syrup, and this delectable, I say delectable in air quotes, delectable, toxic stew, that's a much more pro-inflammatory diet. But the people that are over-consuming, and I love plants, let me be very clear, I love plants, I eat salad almost every day, I eat lots of vegetables, I love vegetables, but if you're having a diet that's chronically devoid of protein, you're putting yourself at great risk. And I say this with love and reverence because I have a lot of friends who still, they're going to live and die by that kale smoothie, that celery juice, those oxalate, the oxalate kind of predominant foods. And then they're wondering,
smoothie, it's on the menu.
The toxic oxalate smoothie. And it's like, it goes back to bio-individuality, like what works for you and your body.
Yeah.
And that can change year to year. Like certainly after being in the hospital for 13 days, I was full carnivore for almost 9 months because that was the only thing my digestive system could tolerate. And then it was 18 months till I could start having my beloved Brussels sprouts. So the point of why I'm sharing this is I think both, if you eat a highly processed, hyper-palatable diet, or if you eat a clean, maybe a cleaner diet, I think many people do well with vegetarian, vegan for a short period of time if they're transitioning from a more standard American diet because they're cleaning up the crap, much to your point. They're getting the junky processed foods out of their lives. By the same token, over time, that much of a diet that's devoid of protein can be problematic as well.
And it's tough because you don't have these overt symptoms. Extreme protein deficiency, if you're doing some freak 40-day cleanse, your hair's going to fall out, you're going to get your gums lining and all these terrible things and get emaciated and have intense cravings for protein foods. But like if you're hovering at that 80% of optimal, you're just going to be someone who gets a little soft over time and recovers in 72 hours instead of 48 and all those kind of things.
Well, I think a lot of people have just gotten accustomed to feeling poorly.
Yeah.
Like that's their norm. That's where they hover. And I think it starts for a lot of women north of 35, as as these hormonal fluctuations are starting, less progesterone from the ovaries, their sleep goes south. All of a sudden they're less stress resilient. They're wondering why they're, waking up in the middle of the night, why they're not waking up rested. They've got weird cravings. They're weight loss resistant. And so all these things start to happen and it becomes kind of subtle. And that's kind of the prelude. So I see a lot of women in perimenopause starting to get stuck, and they go to their healthcare practitioner and they're like, oh, it's just a function of aging. Weight gain is a function of aging. And I always cry BS. There's so many other ways to look around this. I'm not sure if in your practice you see a lot of those types of, I like to think of them as a vulnerable time in a woman's life when, maybe conventional medicine is missing opportunities to help support women in different ways.
Yeah, people struggle a lot. They do everything right. They think that they eat a good diet, and probably a lot of them do, and they exercise, almost daily, and then they just couldn't shed the last 10, 15 pounds. Which bring me to, I want to ask you, because you are a proponent that men and women fast differently, and you really should have different approach. And why do you think that is?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that, I mean, men and women have different levels of hormones, different cycles of hormones. So men, obviously, and menopausal women don't have as much hormonal flux day to day, whereas cycling women, women under the age of 35, so peak fertile years, have a menstrual cycle every month. They've got, fluctuations in estrogen and testosterone and progesterone throughout their cycle. It allows them to be more flexible with flexing into intermittent fasting and different types of, ketogenic or low carb diets and exercise at certain times during their cycle. Perimenopausal women are special. We are less stress resilient. So all of a sudden, we can't tolerate the same levels of intense exercise. We can't tolerate not getting enough sleep. We maybe are much more sensitive to inflammatory foods. This is a time when women, I start suggesting, is the alcohol serving you? How do you do when you drink alcohol? This becomes kind of a very kind of touchy subject for many people. The last 2.5, almost 3 years, people have been drinking a whole lot more. And so saying to women, all of a sudden, let's pull the Band-Aid off and see is alcohol eroding your sleep? Is that what's driving, some degree of estrogen detoxification issues? All of a sudden, you're weight loss resistant. Is it dairy? Is it, and especially cow milk dairy, is it gluten? Is it grains? What's going on with that? And so much to the point you were making, I do believe that when women still have a menstrual cycle, they have to fast for their cycle. So there's a time in the cycle to fast during a follicular phase, a time to stop fasting closer to when you're getting ready to menstruate in the luteal phase. And then when women transition into menopause, as long as sleep and stress and anti-inflammatory nutrition and the right types of exercise are dialed in, they can really have tremendous success without concerns about where am I in my menstrual cycle, which for a lot of people is a source of stress. Maybe not for the people that are on oral contraceptives because they don't even have a real menstrual cycle. But for me, I do encourage women under the age of 35 to be cautious with fasting. Perimenopausal women north of 35 before they go through menopause have a little bit more flexibility, but they have to lean into the lifestyle piece quite a bit.
What about the menopausal, the rest of the crowd?
So andropause, men in general, men go through andropause. But I think when we're looking at menopausal women, yeah, exactly. My husband denies the same thing. He's like, I'm not going through andropause.
It ain't happening.
Yeah, exactly. Not on my watch.
No thanks.
Yeah. I don't want that. But I think when I'm looking at menopausal women, it's really, are they getting enough sleep? Are they managing their stress? Are they consuming anti-inflammatory nutrition, really leaning into the protein and balancing their carbohydrates and healthy fats? And then are they lifting weights? Because I'm going to go back to the same thing I was saying earlier. Sarcopenia is not a question of if, but when. And it's really important to be maintaining muscle mass. So stop doing the chronic cardio, lift some weights, do some yoga, walk quite a bit. All those things are much more beneficial for women in menopause.
Yeah. Definitely see. I mean, I do Zumba dance, sometimes, and it's a very overweight population of these women. Sometimes these women are there every day, if not taking 2 classes, a day, but they are not in great shape, and all that cardio is not helping very much. And I think
it's promoting a loss of muscle mass and storing fat. That's the signaling that's sent to the brain, because that's how you get through 2 classes a day every day, or whatever a chronic exercise pattern. And so that's getting us into the misinformation on the fitness side as well as the diet side. And that's the most heartbreaking thing. It's like, hey, all y'all who are smoking and sitting on your couch, your life expectancy just dropped another year, but I know you don't give a crap, so carry on, and sorry to interrupt your Netflix streaming experience. But the people who are doing the best they can, boy, that's when we can really fight hard to bring an awakening. And before we leave the protein, I'll say one more thing. If you're still not sold yet and you're concerned about eating too much protein, go ahead and do it, because the satiety level of having 6 eggs instead of 3, or 2 steaks or 2.5 steaks, you're going to get to this point where you're like, I'm sorry, I can't do it anymore. I'm fully satisfied. And that might even be optimal, but it's going to be really difficult, maybe impossible, to go and exceed and be this excess protein person that's going to die of cancer. Or am I off base? I mean, I can eat 6 eggs, no problem, but if I tried 10, like Andrew at Power Project, I might feel like, 10's a lot every day.
Yeah, I could not. I think my max in a sitting is 6. I had 3 in my omelet this morning because I had to beg for 3. They were like, we'll give you 2. I'm like, can I have a third?
Wow.
Yeah, I was
I'll
like
pay
pushing
extra.
it. Can you give me more sauce? I mean, it was like it became this negotiation process to try to get. I was like, I'm trying to hit 40 grams of protein. The guy was like, what?
Yeah.
I was like, I'm just trying to explain my pathology of why I'm trying to get things in this way. But I think for a lot of people, it's with the understanding that, when we're in this position where we have opportunities to lean into protein, we should probably take it. And I think for many people, like I mentioned earlier, if women aren't getting enough protein, their bodies are going to be looking for the additional macronutrients. And generally, you're going to be getting them from highly processed, hyperpalatable carbs. That's why the bag of chips, the bowl of ice cream, all those things become very tempting in the evening because your body is looking for more food that you haven't consumed during your day.
Yeah, I remember yesterday going to a restaurant, and because my protein didn't come on quick enough, there's a basket of delicious sourdough bread, and I ate them. At least I put some butter on it, but boy, I did not feel that great. A couple hours later, I just felt like I was just not at my level. I'm dipping in my energy and my just sense of feeling good. Yeah, so that's the price to pay. So, what are your thoughts on the carbs?
I'm not anti-carb. I think carbs are largely driven by insulin sensitivity. So if I have someone who's metabolically healthy, 45, 50, 55 years old, we talk about carb cycling. We talk about high quality carbohydrates. So you're getting your carbs from root vegetables, low glycemic berries, green leafy vegetables, things like that, as opposed to processed carbs. Like, as delicious as bread is, and I totally get it. I mean, I would I'm like, my mouth is salivating thinking about some really good gluten-free sourdough bread. But with that being said, I think the average person doesn't really understand why those whole food sources are so helpful. Like a sweet potato, you can't eat too many sweet potatoes. You're going to get to a point where there's so much fiber that your body's going to go, I've had enough, or whether it's squash or a root vegetable. So I think it's driven by multiple things. So are you insulin sensitive? If you're metabolically unhealthy, I'm going to encourage you to eat lower carbohydrate. And lower carbohydrate, given the average American consumes 200 to 300 grams of carbs a day, we're looking at under 100 as a starting point. And for many people, they don't realize that they're drinking their carbs, which is one of the worst things you can do. If you're familiar with Dr. Rick Johnson's work with fructose, he talks about why fructose is so problematic and really why we should be drinking fructose-laden beverages. It goes directly to our liver, gets stored there, and many of the people who are metabolically unhealthy also have NAFLD, which is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And so really helping people understand what's their carbohydrate threshold, how physically active are they. If they're lifting heavy weights and they're depleting their glycogen stores when they're lifting, that's different than the couch potato I'm now telling them, okay, we're going to rip the Band-Aid off. I don't want you to snack anymore. I want you to eat more protein, and let's watch your carbs. Can you have a sweet potato instead of a bowl of rice? Can you have that root vegetable instead of processed pasta? Can you have some blueberries instead of having 5 bananas? I had a diabetic patient who ate 6 a day, and I'm like, is it any wonder his diabetes is out of control? But really helping people understand there's the hierarchy of carbohydrates. I'm not anti-carb. I myself do better with a lower carb lifestyle, but that's me personally. And I'll cycle up my carbs on days I lift heavy and cycle them back down just depending on how I feel. But I think it's really as bio-individual as that. Like, are you insulin sensitive? Are you physically active? What makes you feel good? There are some genetic variants where people don't tolerate being really low carb. And I think that's important because, unfortunately, I think there's this misnomer that every obese woman needs to be on a ketogenic diet. Well, how do you metabolize your fat? If you're eating a higher fat, lower protein, lower carb diet, you might not feel good. And so really understanding that some genetics play a role as well as just bio-individuality in general. But I'm not anti-carb. I just think quality is important.
And with bio-individuality, we're also talking about the bio-individuality if you're getting your ass off the couch or not. And that's the main one versus, my ancestry is from England and Ireland, and so all this stuff that people are trying to scrutinize. It's like, as Dr. Kate Shanahan says, open up those suitcases. When your glycogen suitcases are open, even a Slurpee is going to go right into glycogen storage. So Jack, your kid, or Jack, my kid, after they're done doing their crazy workouts or 3-hour basketball practice, they can go have a Slurpee and a sweet potato and a bowl of rice, and then another bowl of rice while the sweet potato's cooling off, and then the other one comes out of the oven. And again, with carbs, I think we've made a mistake of like grouping it all together in the pursuit of branded diets and so forth. And there's a huge distinction, so much so that perhaps a lot of the negative effects of people saying that, I do better when my carbs are here, and even better here, and even better there, is because we're mixing in stuff that's difficult to digest.
Well, and I think people can be rigidly dogmatic. Like, if it worked for me, it means it works for everyone. And so I always say to people, I don't eat the
That's
same.
That's not true, except for stuff that works for me.
Right,
exactly.
exactly.
Sorry.
But I think it's important to experiment. Like, see, how do you feel? Yeah. Like, track your macros for a while. How much are you consuming? I think when I ask women to track their protein, they never eat enough, and then they're overeating their carbs, and they don't realize it. Like, they don't realize that it's not, it's not entirely benign if they're having 5 pieces of tropical fruit a day. I'm like, okay, if we're trying to change body composition, we're trying to get more metabolically healthy. If you're not, we really have to be cognizant of how these choices impact what's going on with us. And one of my favorite ways, I'm not sure if you use this with your patients, continuous glucose monitors or glucometers.
I love it.
Because I'm like, I'll say to people, you're falling asleep after your meal and you're telling me you're weight loss resistant. I'm like, well, what's going on? And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, my blood sugar went up 50 points when I had that bowl of rice. I'm like, bingo. So just understanding that there's a threshold of, glucose variability that I'm comfortable with, and then others that I'm not. And I'm pretty outspoken about it. I'm like, if you eat a bolus of carbohydrates and your blood sugar goes up 50 points, it's too many carbs. So let's get real. Let's more protein, maybe add some fats, change, like Glucose Goddess. I don't know if you're familiar with Glucose Revolution. I've been sharing her resource of a book and just saying, well, maybe we need to change the order in what you're eating. Like, maybe start with some fiber first, and then you have your protein, and then maybe you have your carbohydrates, and track then. So there's a lot of moving variables, but I do think glucometers and continuous glucose monitors are a really great way to figure out like that bioindividuality piece beyond just, oh, that's what I want to eat. Because I get it.
Yeah. Well, I was really comfortable and happy with my low-carb diet until Brad had to talk about cortisol and stress, and then you changed your dietary approach.
Yeah, I'm on a 7-month experiment that's probably going to be sustained forever, and I do appreciate that bioindividuality, but I think we're all obligated to move more throughout the day. That might even be up there with sleep. We're talking about diet and exercise, but we might have sleep above all of those, and then just general movement above of your fitness aspirations. In other words, just getting up and walking around might be higher ranked than your punch card at the CrossFit session. So that's kind of a good starting point. And then my inspiration was like, my personal goal is to avoid that sarcopenia and maintain my muscle mass, muscle strength, athletic performance. And so my mindset is perform, recover, perform, recover. How can I do that better? Just like an athlete, because I'm a fake athlete at age 57, but I can call myself whatever I want. That's different than someone who's got bad blood panels, a lot of excess body fat, and is frustrated and needs to go tap into some of these tools, such as, name the title of your book now, and then we'll carry.
The Intermittent Fasting Transformation.
Right. So transforming the physique is a real battle. I mean, it's brutal, and the failure rate is incredibly high. And so if we can tap into these tools that'll kick into lifestyle change, I'm all in favor of that. Just like the keto reset diet, 21-day ketogenic plan, to do something different and go in and start fine-tuning your metabolism. That's great. But my personal example, I talk about it a lot because I think it's relevant for people who are healthy and active and might want to focus on that fitness ambition above all else. And how are we going to fuel that? I'm trying to fuel that with as much nutritious food as I possibly can, including a ton of carbs, relatively speaking to what I ate before. But it's probably not that much, because you have a whole pineapple and a giant bowl of blueberries and some dried fruit and all that. It's all nutritious carbs. There's not an allocation for the Wendy's Frosty, as there was when I was in college and loved stopping off to get Wendy's Frosties.
Well, and it's interesting. I interviewed Stephen Gundry on the podcast, and he was talking about how you can add MCT oil to fruit, and it'll slow. Exactly. So that was what he was advocating for.
Your hotel. Would you like a drizzle of MCT over your berries?
Doesn't sound tasty.
Well, I have to be careful.
Tasteless, but
yeah, no. MCT oil is one of those foods that I think is fascinating, but also you have to be careful with it. Dave Asprey talks about disaster pants And so I have colleagues that can have 2 tablespoons of MCT oil, and if I have a teaspoon, that's my max.
What
Otherwise,
happens when you take it?
it'll give you diarrhea.
Okay.
Hence disaster pants. So when Gundry was talking about, he's like, yeah, you get this big bowl of berries or a big bowl of pineapple, and you just put a tablespoon of MCT oil, and it'll help you, moderate your blood sugar response. And I was like, great. And then hopefully you don't have the untoward digestive distress.
I'm questioning whether someone's adverse blood sugar response to a bolus of fruit might be predicated by a lot of unhealthy lifestyle habits leading up to that, including decades of eating a bunch of junk food. Just wondering.
Yeah, no, I think it's important that we're all transparent about like my N of 1 experiment. Like right now I'm kind of leaning more back towards eating more ketovore or eating more, eating more meat than I had before and less vegetables because my gut will let me know when I've consumed too many. So I'm like, okay, I've been augmenting my fasting window, eating earlier in the day. I know when you were on my podcast, we were talking about the triad that I'm starting to see with a lot of females that they overfast, they over-restrict, and they over-exercise, and why that can be problematic. And so finding that happy medium for each one of us.
Well, that's a bad triad right there.
It's a very bad triad.
And they make bad choices on the dating app, so that's the quadrangular.
So what is a good window for intermittent fasting, in your opinion?
I think a good starting point. Yeah, I think a good starting point is 15 is a 16-8. So 16 hours fasted with an 8-hour feeding window, I think is a really good starting point for most people. And then kind of figuring out for yourself, like days you lifted in the gym, once you're fat adapted, once your body's able to effectively utilize different types of fuel substrates. Like, oh, I lifted heavier this day. I'm really hungry at 9 o'clock in the morning. Do you break your fast or make yourself suffer for 2 more hours? And I'm a huge advocate of there should be no suffering in fasting, or just in general. We should not force ourselves to suffer. So I think,
what a novel and crazy idea
but
from
fasting
author Cynthia
in general
Thurlow. She doesn't want you suffering.
No.
That's suffering for me. Fasting, especially by the end of toward the end of the 3rd day, it's terrible.
So you're doing prolonged fast?
What I don't. I do intermittent fasting, but once in a while when I did the prolonged fast, and it's absolutely miserable, and I get pretty moody.
I bet.
And just feeling like, what am I doing to myself? This can't be good for me.
Yeah. Well, and that's a good example. Like your threshold may be 2 days if you're doing a prolonged fast, but you're also a very petite person. So for you, I always say, like, I think the net benefit of really long fasts, by about 24 hours if you're already lean, I think that you run the risk of breaking down, catabolizing muscle at the expense of any benefits that you're getting in upregulation of autophagy. There was a whole discussion amongst kind of the healthcare people on Twitter talking about these prolonged fasts, what are the benefits, and so I'm just a fervent believer. If you're already a lean person, I'm not sure how much more benefit you're getting by doing these really long prolonged fasts, because I want to protect muscle over the expense of hanging my hat and saying, oh, I did a 4-day fast, because I agree with you. It's as much a mental exercise as a physical one. And so if you feel like you're really, like your mood is suffering, you don't feel good, break your fast.
Yeah, that
but
research.
Then people talk about the autophagy, how you can hit the real autophagy.
Yeah.
Until
I can't
remember how many. What is it, like at least 24 hours?
Well, you know that we get upregulation after 16, 18 hours, but there's no way to test us at home. Like, oh, for you, your personal autophagy threshold is 22 hours.
Pretty soon, we're coming out with a meter that you can stick into your stomach.
Yeah. I'm sure you can. Yeah.
Unless you're in a lab situation.
I appreciate Mike Mutzel's recent video, very popular. It says "Why I Stopped Fasting and What I'm Doing Instead" is the title. We'll have it in the links. But he cites research that at that 48-hour mark of fasting, you get the awesome autophagy benefits. Walter Longo talks about it too, and the fake fast, the mimicking fast, where you can eat a little bit of food every day and get to that 5-day point where your organs shrink because of all the damaged cellular material is gone. And then the video essentially says, if you go slam in the gym for an hour, you will get these similar autophagy signaling to a 48-hour fast. And then he does the punchline, which one would you prefer? Slamming in the gym for an hour or a 48-hour time with no food? And I think piggybacking that is like the major benefits of keto, of prolonged fasting, of intermittent fasting even, or people with metabolic damage that need intervention. They're like, if we're all in the ER, they're going to take those people there and treat them first, and then they're going to have you go do your Zumba class instead. I'm making light of this, but it does feel like that that trade-off where you're going to get all these awesome benefits from fasting, keto, all that stuff, as well as you're going to get a lot of benefits in the gym building muscle. And these are not mutually exclusive, right? They're kind of hand in hand, and the bio-individuality. So let's check our scoreboard, get your ass off the couch, start working out, and then we'll talk about going up from 3 eggs to 6 eggs and all these things that maybe the triad people especially are fearful of.
Well, and it's interesting. I love Mike Muscle's work. I mean, he's high intensity.
I thought you said I love my muscles.
No, I love Mike Muscle's work.
She's working hard in the gym all the time.
No, high intensity health. It's definitely a podcast I listen to on the regular. I think he does a really fantastic job. But is it any question, like, would you rather have a tough workout or fast for 4 days? I mean, to me, that's like a no-brainer. And so, unfortunately, I think there's this methodology and there's this dogmatic thought process that you have to fast for a long period of time to get all these benefits, and you have to suffer a lot. And I'm just not a fan of encouraging anyone to have to suffer a lot. Like, are you going from being a couch potato, doing a standard American diet, transitioning to a more nutrient-dense whole foods diet and eating less often? That shouldn't be perceived as a suffrage, but for some people that may be a little bit of effort, but the long-term gains are pretty significant. But I think for the average person, it's not a question of which one most people I think would want to do. And I certainly, before I had my 13-day hospitalization, I did some longer fasts. I never loved them. And it's much more of a mental fast because you're like, I'm really hungry and I'm grumpy and I think probably dehydrated. And I don't want to have to fast for another 24 hours. What am I going to do with myself? So I think from a lot of different levels, I have to be fully transparent and say, I don't love long fasting either.
I ran into, the Prolon people at the A4M meeting just last weekend, and having a, great conversation with the scientist and this doctor. And he was saying how traditional fast, just, water fast, and that allows more chance for a breakdown of your muscles, and you really don't want that to happen. That's why they're giving you nutrients. But I guess they have specific ratios of nutrients, or you can just cut your food down for 5 days, right? To maybe you eat, I don't know, half or a third of what you ate. I assume you would also achieve similar benefits. But I'm actually a little confused about doing the Prolong versus just, going straight fasting, or just cut down your calories.
Well, I mean, they all fall in the category of stressors, and that's the real insight that really hit me in the head earlier this year when Jay Feldman talks about that really nicely on his Energy Balance podcast, where keto, fasting, restricting calories, whatever, are stressors to the body, and the body responds with these wonderful health benefits. You get the amazing immune boost, anti-inflammatory, the body works better in a fasted state, the muscles repair, all these great things. But if we have to remember that it's a stressor, and then we have to look at our overall stress scoreboard, where we have bitchy girlfriend whined again last night because I was 20 minutes late, my hard workout in the gym, my busy stressful job, a few indulgences where I had the Ben & Jerry's, and you have this big long scoreboard, and then you're going to fast to try to cleanse and take care of all that. But in one context, and it's a very important context to me because I'm talking about perform, recover. I don't want any extra stress. I already have the stress from those people that sent me the email that come looking for me, and I keep dodging it. You know what I mean? Like, we have a stressful life, busy, hectic, stressful life. And now I know I'm going to tee you up in a second here, but that's, I think, lost in the shuffle with how awesome it is to go keto and break free and have all these health awakenings, and you're more clear and mentally alert in the morning when you skip your oatmeal and all that. It's because the stress hormones are flowing and you're on that heightened fight or flight response. Same with jumping in the cold tub, which I'm a huge fan of, but I've taken it down from 6 minutes trying to be tough guy and put up a YouTube video and show how long I can last. Now it's like 1.5 to 2 minutes is fine. It's freaking 38 degrees in the tub. I don't need to stay in there 6 minutes. And I wiggle my legs and I smile and I appreciate it. I almost said enjoy, but that's a whole different mindset than when I was seeing how cold adapted I can get. And I was at 4 and now I'm going for 6. It's just stress and more stress and more stress and more stress. So taking care of our nutritional needs is kind of what you're talking about. And maybe we could shift gears a little and go back to that time in your life when you were working super hard. You had the kids, doing your workouts, and then kind of had a burnout experience where your health decline kind of prompted some of these awakenings and career transition, I guess, along that timeline.
Yes.
I didn't know you had a burnout.
Oh yeah. So yeah, well, I think we talked about that. Did we talk about that? I guess we must have talked about that offline after we recorded for my podcast. So hormesis is beneficial stress in the right amount at the right time. And because I was heading into perimenopause, and I tell everyone, no one prepared me, not my mother, not my GYN, not my girlfriends. It was just like I hit a wall and I was doing too much. I had young kids. My husband traveled internationally. I had a very stressful job. As you can imagine, cardiology, it's like high intensity in the hospital, people who are very critically sick in many instances. So stress. And then I would wake up and take these conditioning classes, which were super intense.
What time?
5:30 in the morning.
God.
And then I would go to the hospital. And so I just remember it was a lot of this wash and repeat. Like I was just really pushing my body. A lot of my friends they played, lacrosse in college. And so I'm hanging out with them, and they're wonderful people. But, it gets to a point where I'm like, I got up one morning and I was like, I literally was like, I'm not depressed. I had no energy. I was like, what is wrong with me? Where am I in my cycle? And so it started this kind of observational pattern of, I'm not sleeping anymore. I'm having weird food cravings. I remember I craved, I don't know if you've ever heard of people making protein pudding. So it's like a scoop of whey protein, and then you add like water to it, and you can put in like nut butter.
Yeah.
Nice.
So I was like eating a lot of that, and it was like I was craving certain things. I was like, what's wrong with me? And then I started becoming weight loss resistant. I'd never struggled with my weight my entire life, not even after having pregnancies and breastfeeding, any of that. And I was like, okay, something's wrong.
What does that term mean?
It means you can't lose weight despite doing all the things that you should be able to lose weight.
Yeah, you're tracking your macros and it's
doing
just
everything right. I'm
something's not
exercising. And so I didn't know enough about what's happening in perimenopause, again, because I didn't know anything about perimenopause. No one ever talked to me about it.
Yeah, you're just a nurse practitioner. What should you know? Yeah.
Exactly. I was like, I went to a leading research institution for undergrad and grad school. Like, how could I not know? But it's because we don't talk to women about these changes. And so I hit this wall, and it literally, I went to my functional medicine person, and it was like my thyroid, I was too much mercury. It was like all these different things. You have a parasite, you've got this, you've got that. And it took me a year of just trying to go to bed on time, changing my diet, which was already pretty good. I would just walk. Like I could tell if I had overdone it because I would just be exhausted the next day. So all I did was walk. I couldn't go to the gym and lift weights. I couldn't go to the gym and take those tough punishing classes anymore. And it was because I completely over-tipped that hormetic bucket. My body was like, time out. And this is even before I was fasting. And so it was the realization that you can't just push your body all the time and not have enough recovery, like you were just mentioning. So I hit that wall, and then it was the following year when I left medicine. By the time my body was healing, I was like, I need to change a lot of things, and one of them needs to be less stress in my life. So that was an easy transition, but I think so many women go through that, but they don't realize it, and they just push through it thinking, it's going to get better, and they get more inflamed and more overweight. And for me, it was like the last I used to call it the 5-pound dairy. The last thing that allowed me to get back to my normal body habitus was dairy. Like I didn't even eat much dairy, but it was like dairy was 5 pounds of inflammation. Oh. One of the hardest things to ever eliminate. Now it makes me totally grossed out. I didn't want it.
But if you eat raw dairy, I'm wondering if that's going to make a big difference.
Don't even touch it. And I would eat raw cheddar, and I would occasionally have like full fat Greek yogurt, and that was about it.
Okay.
But yeah, for me, dairy was the missing link. But it's different for everybody. But it's just the point of why I share this is that even people who are well-meaning, know a lot, can fall into that trap of middle age. Where, people just say it's a normal function of aging to gain weight. I'm like, BS.
Yeah,
it doesn't
it's
have to
be. Sign of dysfunction.
Correct.
Right.
Metabolic inflexibility and imbalance in the body, for sure.
Yeah. Wow. That's a journey. I remember being in the hospital. I worked in the psych ER for 11 years. So twice a week at least. So 40 hours in the psychiatric emergency room for 11 years. And my friends told me that you're going to burn out. I said, no, I'm not going to. So I was fine, but I know it was taking a toll on me. Not sleeping, waking up in the middle of the night. Some nights, of course, no sleep. And then probably not eating the best thing. I tried to be disciplined, but I think, that took a toll. But fortunately, I left before I hit that wall.
How many years did you work in ER psychiatry?
ER was, counting residency, was 11 years. So I never stopped doing the overnights. It was at least twice a week.
Oh, it's brutal.
For 11 years.
It's brutal. I was an ER nurse in inner city Baltimore, and then when I in this one cardiology practice, we did overnights. But the nurses were actually really good to us. They would let us fall asleep on a stretcher for maybe an hour. But I remember right before my son was born, my first son, I was like, I can't do this anymore because I'm an early bird. I'm up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. I want to go to the gym, and I was wrecked. I just could not recover. And it was okay maybe in my 20s, but then in my 30s, I was like, oh man, this is not easy.
I think people do fall into the trap of thinking that they're invincible. That it's almost a badge of honor of how hard you work and how far you can push yourself. Instead of thinking, oh, I'm being dumb, I'm damaging myself, you think I'm tough.
And it's interesting. I was reading a book as I was coming over because I had this long drive, and it was talking about research, talking about shift workers and how they're at greater risk for certain types of cancers and metabolic disorders. And I was texting a girlfriend of mine who's actually a nurse anesthetist and saying, I'm so glad you're no longer working nights. And let me just screenshot this research that I'm looking at. And she was like, oh my gosh. And she's a breast cancer survivor. So for her, getting that validation of how that can impact your, susceptibility, or any of us, our susceptibility to certain types of cancers and metabolic disease is pretty significant.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of John Gray's comments here, the relationship author, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, and all the subsequent books. One of my favorite podcast guests, and he contends that the cultural evolution where the biological male and the biological female are leaving their traditional roles and asked to blend them and merge them. So now today's evolved man is supposed to be honest, vulnerable, nurturing, connecting, helping out with the little kids and all the things that my great-grandfather and grandfather probably worked 8 to 5, came home, lit up the pipe, put their feet up and read the paper. And now we're trying to be all these different things. And then on the female side, he contends, we have record rates of anxiety, depression, prescription drug use by the modern evolved female, because we want them to, of course, their prominent biological drive of being nurturer, caretakers, and all that, and then go kick ass in the workplace. And so he calls it the male side, or the male dominant testosterone side. And so you're waking up. First, you're nurturing, caretaking with your young kids, and then you're heading off to crush it. And I know you're on this career path that's, super intense and challenging, and you're well adapted to it, as we can read in her book, Tiger of Beijing. You really thrive on that type of competitive environment. But John Gray argues persuasively that this is different than your primary female biological drive that we can suppress but we can't escape. So we want you to be everything is basically the question, especially I think females have it worse than the men who are asked to now share their feelings a little more than they did in the past. That's not a big ask for me, although my last...
Especially not you.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of in the problem-solving mode, and then, what emotions are behind that? Well, I'm fucking pissed. Well, that's not an emotion. Let's dig a little deeper. I've gotten that feedback before. But I wonder how, first of all, how that lands, and then how do you manage these things where you're turning the switch on, then you're turning it off, then you're turning it on, then you're turning it off.
Oh boy, Cynthia.
Well, I think it's a constant effort to find balance. I mean, balance is elusive. I mean, let's be honest, but I felt like I had to prove myself by working in the ER. I had to prove myself by going to cardiology, which tends to be a very male-dominated field. And even as an NP, I'd have a very thick skin to deal with, the abruptness and the emergencies and all these other things. I feel like I had to prove myself for a long period of time. I was a young nurse practitioner, prove. And then I think as I've gotten older, it's the recognition that, there are feminine and masculine energies. We as individuals, we lean into one maybe more than another. And so my greatest challenge has been to kind of slow down a little bit, be a little bit more introspective, say no more often. The people-pleasing tendencies that come along with women, especially younger women, the irony is that as we are losing estrogen as we're getting older, we start losing those people-pleasing tendencies, which is a beautiful thing. And so I think it's a constant effort and balance to, find some degree of, within each person's individual lives, like what works best for you, what makes the most sense. For me, I had a mother who was very, very, very successful. And so I don't want to replicate the way that she went about having all that tremendous success. That she was very masculine, like driven and very controlling and domineering, and that worked for her, and she was super successful on a lot of different levels, but I didn't want that for my family.
Was she happy?
No. No. But she was very. I think some people want to be successful for different reasons. I think if it's ego driven, that's probably not the best reason to want to be successful. And so if your ego drives all your decision making, you're probably not going to make the healthiest choices. Whereas I'm very service oriented, and so I always say, like, what's of greatest value to my listeners? What's the greatest value to the people I work with? What's the greatest value to the people on my team? What's the greatest value to your listeners when we're having this conversation? Really being thoughtful about it, and that's very different. So to me, it's always a joy, and I love being able to help people, inspire people, educate people, and empower people. But it comes from a good place. So getting back to your original intention of your question, the way I stay balanced within myself is asking myself the questions: who am I serving? Who am I speaking to? Is this coming from my ego? Because if it is, and I'm trying to be an asshole, that's not a good place to be. So constantly kind of figuring out what is most aligned with my true purpose. What's most aligned with my family's values? What's most aligned for, where I see myself being in, 5 or 10 years. And that's why I'm very family focused, even though I'm traveling this week, but it's just for a couple days. But it's with the intention of going home to say, okay, for 2 weeks where I'm like unplugging to be with my family.
Nice.
I don't know if you
You're looking at Joy now. She ain't gonna escape this question.
Oh, I was hoping that she would just wrap it all in one. Well, I think it is a struggle. My mother was a hypercritical Chinese mother, and growing up in Chinese culture, I think is highly competitive. Imagine you have 1.4 billion people to compete with, and there's very limited resource. So just to get into college, just to give you an idea, my year, I graduated in 1989. It was an easy year to get into college, and that's 1 out of every 8 students graduating from high school get to go to college.
To any college.
The year after me, somehow, I think there's a high birth rate. What happened is 1 in 13. So you can imagine the competition. You can be pretty darn smart and hardworking, but doesn't mean that you're going to get to go to college. So that's kind of the environment I grew up in, that you really have to push hard. And I think I've just, always been a very driven person. So it's just drive. What's the next thing? So it's never been satisfied with, what is, which is great because I've done so much and I've done a lot of good, but how do you balance that with just feeling a sense of calmness and gratefulness and just, appreciating how far you've gone. So that's something, it's a struggle. It's funny, I was a psychiatrist because, I deal with people's mental health conditions, but that's something that seeking that balance, it's a challenge. So my new thing is to do more meditation and really, not just say I'm grateful, but actually feel it in my bones. And I'm working on that, and really feel it and really accepting who I am, because, I've become, coming from Chinese culture, which was an atheist culture, and then having my own spiritual transformation, especially 2 years ago when I, tried ketamine therapy, when I felt I broke through this veil and saw much greater and saw beyond. So that really transformed my perception of my existence, just what I am and what's out there and where I'm going, after this. So how to integrate that into enjoying this life and just feeling the joy. And that's my challenge. My name's joy, but I need to feel it. You know, I like to feel it at all times. I mean, that would be such a beautiful thing. So that's what I'm working on. And it's you know, I think I've shifted a little bit. Before it was accomplish, but now it doesn't matter as much. What matters is how in tune I am with my existence, and that can be achieved by just being in nature, by you know, loving the animals around you or appreciating people around you. So it's a different focus. It seems like I'm doing even more than before, but the focus is different. You know, I like to focus on more on the enjoyment of life and of existence. You know, just make every day, every interaction, you know, like, you know, feel something inside of you, right? Like make the heart feel good. Yeah.
No, it's definitely a spiritual journey. It sounds like.
Yes.
It's beautiful.
Yes, and I'm still journeying.
Oh, that's wonderful. I think for so many of us, I've gotten much more introspective I think since 2019 in particular, because I had been so sick. I was like, if I get out of this hospital bed, if I go home, if I'm okay, I'm going to live my life a very different, like stop the people pleasing, have more boundaries, but be very clear. I fear nothing. I truly fear nothing. I'm like, no matter what happens, I'm going to be okay. And so, you know, for me, 2019 was like, there was a line in the sand. It's like, okay, what are we going to do? And so, you know, the worst thing that ever happened to me was the biggest blessing that ever happened. And
Tell
so
us
from
about
that,
it.
it's really powerful. So I spent 13 days in the hospital in 2019. I went to the hospital with the worst abdominal pain I'd ever had, worse than labor, which said something. And it turned out I had a ruptured appendix, but not just a ruptured appendix. I had initially pancreatitis, so the whole length of my colon was inflamed. And the surgeons wanted to take me to the OR. And I was like, time out, you can't take my colon. And they're like, of course we can take your colon. I said, I don't want to have a colostomy bag for the rest of my life. No, I need you to save my colon. And so my husband was like, please save her colon. I'm not going to hear the end of it.
I'll never hear the end of it.
I'll never hear the end of it. And so that then started this 13-day journey. It was like day 2, I developed a small bowel obstruction. So I went from looking normal to looking like I was 6 months pregnant. And then it was like one series of complications after another. I developed retroperitoneal abscesses. I developed a fistula. I was seeing 5 or 6 different specialists trying to figure out what was going on. And so during that 13-day journey, on day 5, I recall that I was visited by a spirit, God, whomever, the universe. And it was, you know, what do you want to do?
Did you have a ketamine IV in it?
No, I did
Dr.
not.
Joy Kong? No.
I did not. But I remember very distinctly, I was like, I set an intention. There are 2 things I want to do. I want to get home to my kids and I want to do this talk. And of course, my husband thought I was nuts in the midst of being very sick. And so day 13, I went home and I said to my mom, my Italian mother, probably a lot like a Chinese mom, I said to my mom, I want to do this talk. She's like, no, you're not doing this talk. You're going to recover and you're going to, you know, I'd lost 15 pounds. So I look like a skeleton. And, you know, like I'd missed every milestone for this talk. And so my husband reached out to them and said, she still wants to do the talk. And they were like, why? We totally understand she doesn't want to do it. They let me do it. And so 27 days after I left the hospital, I did a talk that changed my life. And I did the talk really to show my kids I was okay. That was the intention. I was like, I really just want to show my kids I'm okay. And that talk is, you know, the rest is history because it went viral and it changed everything, the trajectory of my business. But what I always say, the most important thing to me is how it changed me as a person, not because it went viral, but because I had been so sick and realizing like, what's most important in my life? What do I want to do with my life? I don't want to play safe anymore. You know, let's like embrace opportunities. Let's do things outside your comfort zone. I'm a total introvert, which people are always surprised to know. Super introvert. You know, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? You know, for the next 40 some odd years, what do I want to do? Do I want to live safe and small? No. And so I grew up in a house where I had a mother who was very successful. I had a father who didn't live to his full potential. He would say that himself. I'm not paraphrasing. And so I just think my place in this space is to show people what's possible. And so in a way where I'm incredibly grateful for every day and very appreciative. And I know we shared a ruptured appendix story. I tell everyone, I'm like, I never respected the appendix. I used to call it a useless vestigial organ. Oh, in the ER, I was like, oh, no one needs an appendix. And sure enough.
What were you afraid of, and how were you holding yourself back prior to the visit?
I think I had been conditioned to believe that, I have certain family members that are very, very financially successful. And it's like, oh, you serve others. You're a caretaker. You're a healthcare provider. You're not meant to make money. You're not meant to be successful in a different capacity. And so, to me, it was very empowering to realize, like, I had no business training, and yet I made a series of really good decisions, one after another, very serendipitously, that led me to a place where, it expanded every opportunity that I could have ever imagined. The people I get to meet, the individuals I get to help, being on a platform where I get to really encourage women to think beyond the obvious, like not to get caught up in scarcity mindset, not to believe that you can't be still very vital and active and capable, north of 35 or 40. And so I feel very, very, very grateful.
You talked some about the concept of manifesting, the vision boards, the goals, seeing these things. You talked about it just before we started recording, that you want to, imagine yourself with all your successes and how that feels.
Right.
Right. So we're writing down our goals.
Really
I'm going to add a 0 to some of my business goals. And there, I met my goal. I just add a 0. It's that simple. And then how do I feel about it is the next step besides going for these linear goals.
And live in that feeling.
Yeah.
It's an amazing feeling. It's funny. I've created a vision board every year. I don't necessarily make it public. It's just something that I have. And there was someone I put on a vision board like 5 years ago. And I've listened to this person's podcast, and I've been like, I'm just really been amazed at his ability to connect with people. And I was on his podcast this fall, and I was trying not to be a dork in his presence because he was amazing and wonderful. And at the very end, as I was leaving, I just said, I have to let you know, 5 years ago, I put you on a vision board. And I said, I'm still kind of like pinching myself that I'm here, but yet I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Like, I'm exactly at a point in my career where I'm supposed to be. I would not have lived to my full potential if I'd stayed in clinical medicine. I wouldn't be able to help as many people. And so I tell my kids, and so my 15-year-old, who's kind of cynical, he was like, Mom's going to manifest, blah, 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 blah. And I just have to remind him, I'm like, manifestation is a really powerful act, and it's one we should lean into. It's something that for me, everything that I've stated I want to do has happened. And so it's like taking those little incremental steps forward that allows us to put ourselves in positions and to grow. Like, you should be doing things that scare you. You should never get complacent. When we get comfortable, we don't grow. And through adversity comes opportunity. And that to me has just been what I feel like I've really learned in the last few years in particular. Like, we don't grow when we're comfortable.
So once you put it on the vision board, do you do anything about it to reinforce it? Like, what do you do with it?
I look at it because for me, I'm very visually oriented. So it's just a reminder. For me this year, it was, more inner growth stuff. So I want to make sure that I'm investing in, like, I've been doing more Reiki therapy, and I've been doing more, cognitive work, because I always say, like, I think I'm convinced that traditional therapy is something I will probably do for the rest of my life, because there's always stuff I need to work on. Like, I'm not perfect. I'm perfectly imperfect. And so there's always things like, when I get triggered, you're like, okay, well, there's something I need to work on. There's like, and it's funny.
What an opportunity. Yeah. Thank you so much for being such an asshole. Yeah.
No, but it's interesting, like the whole concept of trauma, leaving scars, and you're like, I got triggered, so what am I not dealing with? Because I think the only way that I can evolve into the person I'm supposed to be, because I'm not yet there, is just constantly introducing opportunities to become stronger, be more, just putting myself in positions where I'm growing constantly. So to answer your question, my vision board is part visual representation of the direction I'm going in, but it's also the validation, like, as I'm achieving those things that I'm talking about, and they're not material things, like, let me be clear. Like, sometimes people put that, like, I want to have this kind of car. It's not that kind of stuff. It's substantive things. Who do I want to meet? Who do I want to speak on a stage with? What are the opportunities I want to have come my way in my business, or personally or professionally? Right now I'm a stage where I've got teenagers, and teenagers don't really love spending time with their parents. I mean, they do and they don't. And so it's constantly entertaining ways like, how can I connect more with my kids before they go to college? How can I be more present for my husband? Because I tend to be like a whirling dervish in my head, where I'm like, oh, I got all this stuff I need to do, and I'm not 100% present all the time. So how can I be more present, more capable?
Yeah, I think the mere act of making the effort is taking these huge steps forward, and I'm coming to appreciate these concepts more, where maybe perhaps at first I would call bullshit on the characterization where I'm going to manifest the perfect guy. He's got a little bit of stubble. He flies private. He's got a Ferrari, and we ridicule this type of this art or whatever you want to call it. And so if you think it's BS, like perhaps a teenager might pop off about it, he's absolutely correct, because that's you form that belief. You're right. It doesn't mean shit, and you might as well forget it. But then if you sort of tiptoe in this direction and realize also that anything we've accomplished to date, we dreamed about it beforehand, I promise you, in one way, shape, or form. So that's kind of a way to kind of open up, I think, more people, especially those who might be resistant or make these self-limiting beliefs and verbalize them, and that's part of your life, and that person complains a lot, and it's just kind of something they own that they might want to get rid of. I like Luke Story's take on this whole concept of manifestation. He says, it won't work, and you're not connected to anything until you start with a place of gratitude for where you are right now. So he would drive through the Hollywood Hills and see these big-ass estates and think, why not me? I would throw kick-ass parties there instead of those, hermits that don't even use their 17 bedrooms, whatever. And that's, we want to get past that and think, wow, I love my little private space here in my one-bedroom apartment, and now I'm going to see myself in the future and feel what it's like to be in that estate, throwing the big party, whatever. Okay, so we start with a position of gratitude, and then we open up to the forces or whatever we want to call it.
Because the potential is endless. It's as big as our imagination.
You write that a lot on your Instagram, I notice, and all that cosmic connections, and like, again, just reading it, even if you're in a bad mood or whatever, you're cut off. And we were talking about this before, where I start my day with tremendous gratitude. I do my morning exercise routine. It makes me feel so good. I'm locked in. I'm honoring Dave Rossi's contention that the way to become happy is to remove all the things that make you unhappy. And it's like, dang, that works every time. And boy, am I happy just to be alive. And then something comes in to make you unhappy. And that's, I guess, what you're talking about. Both of you said it's a process. You're working on it. And that's all we're going to do until further notice.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's interesting to me that in having the ability to talk to so many women, how many people feel stuck and they're not ready to do the work. And I just keep saying, like, trust in the process. Like, today you may be able to go from A to B, and then maybe, 6 months from now you go from A to B to C, and just understanding that we're all in this journey. We all want to be growing. We don't want to be stagnant. And yet, gosh, the last almost 3 years have shown us there's a lot of people where there's a lot of cognitive dissonance, and they really struggle to be able to evolve as a human being. And so I feel very fortunate that I have opportunities to connect with like-minded people, because that's how we all grow.
Are we stuck because of all the difficult influences that get in our way today?
I think that's part of it, but I think there are some people, I always say it's the world of nice. They just live in this world of nice where, they're flying at 30,000 feet and they're just not willing to see, like I always say, like I've always been I'm probably the truth teller in my family, which gets me in trouble. I'm like, I just see things and I say it. But I think there are people who just don't exist in a space where either they're comfortable or they're capable of seeing things at a deeper level.
I don't know. What do you think? Does that
this
hit home with you, Joy?
Yeah, well, people are, comfort, I think, is a big thing, mental comfort. And, even if it's a miserable place, it's still can be very comfortable. And to break through a particular state requires an activation energy. So either you don't have that energy and the drive within you, or you haven't discovered it, then you're never going to break through. Then it's just, let's just stay this miserably comfortable place. And that's what I see a lot of people are doing.
Well, I feel like these ladies are seeing right through me now, and I could be one of those nices. Seriously, because I have a tendency to avoid conflict. I've never once got in the face of a guest calling bullshit on certain stuff that I could have been a completely different podcast host and say, okay, now wait a second. Actually, we do have one occasion where I said, is there any research to back that up? And the answer was, if you don't believe in creation, you're not going to like my answer. Oh. And so I did go out on that limb when told that celery was good for the bones because it looks like a bone, and walnuts are good for the brain because it resembles a brain, the walnuts, and then Mark Sisson and I went offline, after the show, and we made up some more, like, candy corn look like teeth, so it's good for your teeth. Cotton candy looks like lungs, so it's good for your lungs. But in general, what I'm saying is I'm navigating through life conflict averse, and also, I guess, the people pleasing, where you want to be appreciated, you want to be liked, you don't want to say no. And these are things I guess I'd say I'm aware of and working on, because I feel like there might be a different level where it's more unfiltered, which is what I think this communication medium is all about anyway. It's not the KTLA news, and we'll be back in 3 more minutes of these two ladies, and then we're done. Now we can do whatever. So I'm sharing that I think I'm looking for a breakthrough in that area where it's just the real me at all times. We can always dispense feedback with loving kindness, and I strongly believe at all times, with no excuses, especially with kids, loved ones, romantic partner, whatever. There's no need for sparks, but sometimes those sparks start flying when you get triggered because you forgot and you were living nice for these 7 things, and now you get triggered. So that's my add-on there. Work in progress.
So you're no Paul Saladino.
Yeah, right. I mean, and you know what? Like, I gravitate toward certain personalities and have my entire life where they did have that jerky boy gene, which I appreciated, and kind of it fed me, because I think we look for complementary forces, right? And I'm not sure I would recommend that in a romantic partnership. I really like the nicey nice as the starting point, and maybe the ending point. Even when shit gets difficult, we can still speak always with loving kindness, but get your true your true self out there, and understand to advocate for your own needs and your boundaries and things like that.
I think that's really important. I think a lot of people are conditioned to be constantly giving and not advocating for themselves, and that can be a recipe for an unhappy life if you don't acknowledge your needs.
What do you call it when you're stuck in the comfort zone?
Yeah. And I think another thing I'm learning, and I was talking with somebody, group of people, because I think in this culture, in Western culture, people talk about love a lot. Love, Jesus love, love for each other, love.
Ice cream.
I don't hear that very much in China. People don't talk about love, even in religions. It's not about, they may talk, maybe a little bit of compassion, a lot about compassion, which they can call it a broad love, but they don't, it's very different. This culture is very focused on love, but I'm trying to, kind of feel what people are feeling here, because people who have had, a lot of spiritual experiences feel that there's tremendous amount of love coming our way, that if we only know how much we're loved, then our life is going to be so much more blessed, and we're going to feel so much better. So that's something that, I think it's going to take some practice, is actually to feel loved. And I think that's what's happening with a lot of people as well, because they don't think they are loved. And then you're just in this world fighting for yourself. It's a lonely process.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I reflect on the past nearly 3 years, and just what goes on with brain physiology when people are stressed. The overriding of your prefrontal cortex. People are in the stress state. They're reactionary. They're not thinking. They're fighting or fleeing. And so really understanding that there's so much to play with emotions and connection, and obviously this is your area of expertise, but from
I don't feel like an expert.
but I think on a lot of different levels, what I've watched and witnessed as someone who was a poli-sci major the first time around, what I've watched over the last 3 years, it's like, wow, the pendulum can swing where we understand and we lean into love and we lean into gratitude and we lean into connection, or it can be the opposite. And I think when people are disconnected and feel unloved, feel unworthy, that's where a lot of negativity can stem from.
Yeah. It's not like, I want to talk about love. It's because I hit a wall, right? And how do you look at your life again? And the wall is the wall of judgmentalness and negativity, right? Negative talk, negative perceptions. So, and that creates misery. So even though I am overall a pretty positive person, but I still have negative self-talks. So it's not, I usually would not have, talked about love. I didn't go into medical school thinking I'm going to be a psychiatrist or, be very touchy-feely. That's not my, that was not the farthest from my mind. But I think it's through living life and not reaching a state of happiness that you think you should be able to, like we all want to. And what is it's preventing us? What is in the way? And that's probably why I'm thinking about all this. But I think that has the potential to transform a lot of people's lives, because we can talk about diet all we want, but if we don't feel good about ourselves, and we don't feel connected, it's
yeah, there's an execution
not gonna get there.
Yeah, that's what's underneath the surface of failure to execute. Because I think there's a lot of knowledge out there, and a lot of people know where their shortcomings are, and they make a futile effort, and they go regress again. I like James Clear, Atomic Habits, #1 best-selling book in the world right now, where he makes the point of set the bar really freaking low so that you can jump over it and make some progress, and then celebrate it every time. And especially when it comes to diet and changing these habits, and they're wiring our brain for the indulgent foods, and so we really are addicted to them at a certain level. But if you can just take that baby step and cut out maybe one little indulgence that's particular to you, get over that bar. Because when you said stuck, I'm immediately thinking of people that they got 17 goals and they're really stuck because none of them are working well. Well, why don't you take one, and then we'll check back in a month, and depending on the starting point, let's make it easy. I love that idea for everything, even staying away from the distraction of the email inbox. I talked to Seth Godin. He's a best-selling author of many books and marketing expert and peak performance expert. And I said, I had my list of questions ready to talk to this guy, and one of them was like, as a fellow author, when I'm working on a book, what do you suggest to alleviate the potential distraction of the email inbox? Because I really struggle with that. Oh, good question. Thank you, Brad. He says, turn that shit off and get the work done. The work is too important. That's your calling. That's your highest purpose. Get the freaking book done and turn that shit off. And then there's that silence that we just have right here. I'm waiting for, his 7 tips to avoid email distractions. No, that was it. Done. Next question, please. I'm like, all right, that's pretty badass. Okay, say no more.
Have you ever read the book Eat the Frog?
No.
It's a short read, but my first business coach was like, you need to read this book. And so effectively what you do is you do the 3 things you don't want to do the most first thing in the morning, because then you're a total badass the rest of the day. And so it's a book I recommend to my coaches. I'm like, listen, I'm telling you, this book, although it's very simple, it's written for anyone. To me, it was incredibly impactful along the lines of Atomic Habits. Set the bar low so you're going to succeed, set yourself up for success. And I think, to your point, I think so many of us, we overcomplicate things. You were expecting Seth Godin to give you, these are the 7 tips, and you're like, just turn it off.
Yeah, and
just
that's setting up for failure, really, to overcomplicate things or make them too daunting.
So maybe first step, to set the time of checking email to whatever,
batching, whatever.
3 p.m.,
Yeah, and then
for
also
for 20 minutes, and that's it.
Yeah, and we're succumbing to this cultural programming, the hacking of the American mind. Dr. Robert Lustig, who's a food expert, but this book was great about the dopamine triggers that marketing forces are throwing at us because they know they work, and they work really effectively, and we get distracted because we get. It's called intermittent variable reward, like a slot machine, when we look at our text messages or our social media feed. It's new, it's novel, and the human brain is wired way more toward that than working on a frustrating manuscript or something that's challenging and that you have to persevere and struggle through. However, persevering and struggling through daunting challenges that are aligned with your highest purpose is the essence of living a rich and meaningful life. So we're compelled to do it. We know it's better for us. It feels great to hit send when you finish a 230-page book that started with a blank screen, but how did I spend my time yesterday afternoon during my book writing block, messing with this, messing with that? And I think we're facing this now. We're all of a certain age where we can reference this chunk of our life where there was no internet, no distraction, no mobile device. And so my heart's breaking for myself and also the younger generation, because now it's like, this is the longest direct conversation I've had in many years, because there's always something interrupting. And even in routine everyday transaction, it's like, we jump to something else. We jump to something else in our mind or in our mouth, and it's like, boy, it's an adjustment that I'm having a hard time with. And I think it would serve us to. Dr. Lustig listed 10 ways. It's like junk food, prescription drugs, street drugs, pornography, video gaming, excessive exercise, all these things. You get a huge dopamine hit right away. Serial dating, all this kind of crap. And it's like, wow, that's pretty much what we're seeing on advertisements and we're indulging in.
No, it's an interesting time. I mean, I'm grateful that all of us grew up in a time when you went to college and we all did stupid things, but they weren't chronicled on social media and shared with the world. And I just think it was still a kind of a blissful period. We didn't walk around with cell phones. I mean, it wasn't until grad school that I had a cell phone. I remember I would leave it in the cab. I was always leaving at places because I didn't like having a cell phone. I hated being accessible. And I think we're just so connected all the time that people don't get opportunities to really decompress because we're so connected. I mean, a good example, my phone rang multiple times while I was here, even though it was off, ringing to my iPhone or my Apple Watch. And just that connection where you're like, I'm never truly disconnected, and I want to be. I think most of us desire to be.
So you have teenage boys in the house right now. You're like probably fighting this battle. As I recall, my kids are in their 20s. And then I'm going to ask from the peanut gallery, I would love to have an outside opinion on today's model, typical helicopter/lawnmower parent. So we're gonna have everyone involved here, but I just felt like it was a daily battle to navigate all these untoward forces of culture that could send things off track.
Well, I think my kids lived through this pandemic, and so the wheels fell off the bus then because they weren't going to school every day. They weren't seeing their friends. The only way they could be connected was to be on their computer, where they were sort of kind of in school but not really, and connecting on gaming computers. And so I feel like the wheels fell off the bus in 2020, and so giving them a lot of latitude again because. You had to. It's like all of us are living through a time we'd never dealt with before. You can't see your loved ones. You can't travel anywhere without a mask. It was just so frustrating. And then when they got back to school, maybe it got a little bit better. But now we just shut the Wi-Fi off at night, which is a source of tremendous pain for the teenagers because then they circumvent ways to get back on the internet or to get back on the Wi-Fi. I mean, it's just an endless. So I think I've gotten to the point now where I'm trying to just, do they get good grades and they generally are good kids? Yes. Then I cannot allow myself to stress constantly. I cannot be a helicopter parent because I don't have the bandwidth for it. Like the friends or the people I know socially that are that way, I'm like, your kids are going to hate you. You have to let them fly. Like I have a 17-year-old and a 15-year-old. They have to be able to make some of their own decisions, whether they're the right decisions or the wrong decisions. They have to have the ability to make some decisions in a safe way. And so for me personally, the wheels fell off the bus in 2000. We try to keep things reined in. It's not a perfect system. Now the teenagers go to bed later than we do. So that's one issue. They aren't out later. They're up in the house. So it's First dinner is when all of us eat together. Second dinner is when they come down at 9 o'clock at night to destroy my kitchen and have second dinner. And then, they go to bed 3 hours after me. I just can't stay up till midnight. I really can't.
You can't police that.
No. So we've had to set boundaries and expectations, and sometimes they rise to set expectations and sometimes they don't. And there are consequences to that.
They're going to turn out just fine.
Yeah.
No, because, speaking from knowing myself and what kind of kid I was, and it's going to be fine because they just need to explore and test out the boundaries and make some mistakes, and then they're going to be who they really are. They're going to find their way. So I remember, at the time when I was the most, off track, hanging out with a bunch of bad kids and, 13 years old and, coming home and, 9, 10 o'clock at night, having not eaten anything and just, my parents didn't know what to do with me. And my mom was giving up on me, and my dad was the one that was always there, writing me notes saying, "Dear daughter, I'm worried about you. I can't bear to see you going down this road." And then I would be so mad that he was trying to change how I was, which was been bad. And how dare he? So I'd tear up his note and toss it. But inside, I knew this man cares about me. My mom didn't. My mom was like, "You're going to be social garbage. Goodbye." But my dad was always there.
Wow.
And by the time I needed to make a decision of where I want to go in my life, do I want to actually get into a good high school so I can go to college, or do I just want to, just float away? It was knowing the love from my dad that actually meant something. So that's what I used to tell my patients, when I was doing psychiatry, is that because they complain about their kids and how difficult it is, I said the best thing you can do is to love them.
Because it's a blessing. That's the one thing people don't realize. They assume they're teenagers who wall themselves up in their bedroom, that they don't want to talk, they don't want to connect. And I always say you have to get creative. You have to meet them on their terms. It could be that you take one to run errands, or you go grocery shopping, whatever it is. You take them to a movie. I never say that I think parenting per se is hard. It's a journey. I've loved every stage, genuinely. My kids know that. This stage gets more challenging because they're bigger than me. They weigh more than me. I look up at them.
This.
They look
okay,
at
time out.
Yeah, no, there's none of that. And I think for a lot of people, it's that reframe of understanding like what you want or what we desire our children to turn into are strong, independent, healthy adults. That's what we want. That's everything we're doing is investing in that. And so I think some of the challenges that I see other people making, just kind of objectively, is that they don't like their kids having a personality or ideas that differ from their own, and they're uncomfortable with that. It scares them. And instead of like leaning into their kid and saying, "Okay, tell me more about that," because I have one child who has very strong political views which are not aligned with mine or my husband's, and we're like, "Where did this kid come from?" And so sometimes I'll just invite him. I'm like, "Tell me more about that."
Wow.
Explain that to me. And in the back of my head, I'm going, where did this come from? Yeah.
That's a nice way to diffuse that.
Yes.
And the letter writing, that is so touching. What a fantastic
lovely
strategy.
Oh, you know
Because
what?
that counts for, it's like tearing it up. You're having to physically tear
Being
up his
defiant.
words.
You
Is
know
like
what the kicker was?
incredible impression.
Years later, I found out that my parents had gone to the trash
No.
can, picked up all the
Oh,
pieces, and glued them all back together and saved all the notes.
Oh my God.
That's so sweet. I don't have a dad like that, so I really respect that.
Yeah, that's some
I'm going to
patience.
start using that technique even at this late date. It's never too late to write a note to your kid.
Yeah, just
One way
tell
or the
them how
other. I
much
love you.
care.
I'm concerned about you, or congratulations, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Whew. Heavy.
It's not a lot of text. My handwriting's illegible. Is your handwriting illegible?
No, it's beautiful.
Mine's terrible. I'm telling you, years of writing in hospital charts
Yeah.
way before the advent of EMRs.
Yeah, people actually say, like, "You're actually a doctor? You don't write like a
Yeah.
doctor."
No, my signature is scribble. Like that is my legal signature, scribble.
Well, you're trying to prove yourself to everyone there, so you had to scribble like the rest of the rest of the medical scene.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true. You're the outlier.
So back to the Brussels sprouts. You had to put them on the sidelines as you healed. You went strict carnivore.
I had to.
And all in the name of healing all that trauma. So let's talk a little bit about this carnivore movement, which is fascinating to me, especially the amazing healing stories. I've drifted in that direction, a lifelong shift in my eating habits to realize that animal-based makes the most sense. It's evolutionary model, all those things. And then the new insight, to me anyway, and to most of us, that these wonderful, colorful plant foods that have been widely agreed to be the centerpiece of a healthy diet are possibly not that necessary and even potentially problematic. I love Brian Sanders' Peak Human podcast, where he has this food scoreboard, really simple. Junk food, processed food is -1, vegetables are a 0, and meat and fruit are +1. It's like, okay.
Wow.
Wait, there are going to be a lot of doctors who disagree with you,
Sure.
or doctors in the integrated medicine space.
A lot of humans that disagree with the Peak Human, right? But I think the breakthrough insight, or the controversial insight, is what about these wonderful, colorful plant foods that have high levels of phytonutrients and things that also are technically toxins prompting a defense response?
I think so much of it's the health of your gut microbiome. I know for myself, 6 weeks of antifungals and antibiotics, my gut was decimated.
Right. You had leaky gut and
terrible leaky
unfunctioning gut and everything else gut.
Yes, I had all sorts of
Punch in the gut,
structural,
everything.
structural problems times 100. So I think it's been my experience personally and professionally that there was a period of time where I could not tolerate fiber. Couldn't tolerate it. And even now, I can tell you when I've had too much roughage, too much raw vegetables, too many vegetables in general, my body will give me a check-in like, oh, time out. You might want to do carnivore for a couple weeks, or you may need to do carnivore for a week or two, just to kind of get things back on board. And so I think that litmus test is important. I think that's where that bioindividuality comes in. Like my mother, it gives her hives that I really stay away from oxalates because that's the one thing I learned for me was particularly potent. Whether it's almond flour crackers, whether it's spinach and kale and celery, and I mean things that are not intrinsically, minus the processed crackers, things that are not intrinsically all that bad for you. But for me, if I were to eat a kale salad, that would probably set things up that it would just be like enough inflammation that it would just start this whole onslaught of problematic symptoms that I would have. I'll just leave it there as opposed to giving you graphic examples.
So a high oxalate food. Oxalate is one of these plant poisons, natural plant toxin that can cause inflammation. It can promote gout and many other things. And I like how you started the discussion, because if you have healthy gut function and healthy immune function, humans have been proven to be incredibly resilient. We can eat all kinds of stuff from all over the globe. And then we have the modern human, where a lot of people are probably suffering from imperfect digestibility. If you have gas, bloating, elimination irregularities, all these things, which most people can raise their hand. That's why they do the commercial. Do you have frequent this, and this? Then try this pill. So if we're not, optimal, and we're looking to experiment, especially if there's a nagging condition of any kind that's not responding to whatever prescription medication or dietary intervention, that's when we really shine the light on this new idea of leaving out the super nutrition plant foods.
Well, and it's interesting. Dr. Terry Walls, who obviously healed her MS with a phytonutrient dense diet, she talks about 9 cups of vegetables a day. I'm like, if I ate even in a healthier gut state 9 cups of vegetables, that would not agree with me. So I think it really comes back to leaning it, like being cognizant and aware of what makes your body feel good, what gives you digestive symptoms like bloating and constipation and diarrhea are not normal. So if they start happening, it means something is off. And unfortunately, it's like I think a lot of people just assume this is their normal. And I'm like, you should not be constipated. That is not normal. How many women think it's okay to poop twice a week? And I'm like, there's something that's amiss here. This should not be your normal.
Sarcopenia, constipation, gas, bloating, it's all normal. 17 prescriptions.
Yes.
Right. And I think what was new for me was to realize that, like, you're consuming, when you have that kale salad, you're not consuming directly all these wonderful phytonutrients and antioxidants that go into your bloodstream and make you healthier. You're consuming the poison, and you're prompted to mount an antioxidant defense response in the body. I'm like, wait, are you sure, Paul Saladino? Is this true? He's like, yeah. The blueberries are not a handful of antioxidants. They're a handful of things that prompt an antioxidant response.
Which could be a good thing.
A fantastic thing. And, a plant-based diet and all the highly regarded benefits. So I think my follow-up was, if you can get those benefits elsewhere, such as fasting. I mean, what's more antioxidant? The morning smoothie at the smoothie bar or fasting until your meal? Fasting's probably going to win, I'm guessing, in some context. And so if that's the case, what's the rationale left over to go looking for a salad every day besides enjoying your life and wanting to celebrate with the salad rather than Ben & Jerry's?
Well, besides salad tastes amazing.
Right. I mean, no joke. I mean, that's what I'm saying is like you want to live and enjoy your life. And the handmade gourmet ice cream in Seattle, where they have a bunch of different places you can go test and sample, it's delicious. So I'll do that not with my shopping cart today when I go to the store, but when I'm on vacation and indulging and enjoying my life. I have no problem with that. Same with if you truly enjoy salad. But what happened to me in May of 2019, hearing this information, I'm looking at my salad going, well, it's crunchy, but the dressing's good on it and the things I put on it, but it was sort of like, if this is not the centerpiece of health and going to help me live to 123, I guess I'm second guessing it now and looking more towards the slices of liver and the eggs and the grass-fed buffalo and those things that are the true nutrient-dense foods of the planet. I'm kind of being argumentative here. I want to get you guys going and throwing out some spice. But to me, it was like a real awakening, and also putting me in the ashamed and embarrassed category from writing these books, saying, this is the ultimate, and if you can, the further you can get toward more colorful and more plants on your plate. We take a picture of the plate with 2/3 plants and 1/3. Some of that's now being aggressively challenged by the promoters of the carnivore movement.
But isn't it supposed to be that we evolve and shift and change as clinicians and human beings throughout our lifetime?
So I don't have to be embarrassed and ashamed? Is that what you're saying?
No, because I used to tell patients, eat frequently and eat snacks and mini meals to stoke your metabolism and stabilize your blood sugar. I mean, I cringe.
Jay Feldman's saying that to me right now. And I'm like, dude, so we're on the journey for sure.
No, and I think, on so many levels as a clinician, as a human being, I have shifted my perspective on so many things. When I first heard about paleo, I was like, why would anyone?
Freaking caveman.
Exactly. Yeah. Why would I want to do that? And then I gave up gluten, and I reversed an autoimmune condition, and then I gave up dairy a few years later, and then I gave up grain. And so to me, it's figuring out what works for you, what doesn't work for you, and then kind of leaning into the science. I don't disagree that carnivore can be beneficial, but I don't think we're intended to just eat meat forever.
Right, it's an extreme.
I think we need some variety. And I'm a perfect example. 9 months of carnivore, I felt 100% better. Mm-hmm. But I missed vegetables. And so I think that it really speaks to the fact that we should be open to the possibility that we don't have all the answers, and that we can change our perspectives. Much you said, even I wrote a book that got published this year, and there are things I probably would have said differently now, a year later. Exactly.
Do some miming.
Yeah, coming from different culture. I mean, China, 10,000 years, civilization. I mean, plants have always been really important, right? Look at all the Chinese herbs. Granted they have some, other things, animals and insects in there, but plant is the mainstay of Chinese herbal medicine, and also so much what they do is to use, all these basically different plants to heal.
Right. So,
I mean, it's going to be very hard to, to be convinced that is going to be bad for you. I think it's, I don't know exactly which ones are the best for a particular person. That probably takes some fine tuning, but it's going to be very hard for me to think that I can just shoot plants down.
Just throw away 7,000 years of Chinese medicine. Well, I don't think Paul Saladino would agree strongly that plants have the healing and medicinal properties, and that's different than making them the centerpiece of your calories every day. And I appreciate that, and I appreciate how he evolved and now started chowing down on the honey and the fruit when he was, the meat and meat person. And so that brings us to I'm kind of on this meat and fruit kick right now, realizing that fruit is very difficult to criticize as, isn't that too many carbs in your diet? That fruit is an incredibly nutritious food that's easy to digest by and large, especially compared to the plants that we're asked to put aside due to potential sensitivity to the high levels of oxalates and all the other lists, sulforaphanes, and all that stuff. So, and the carbohydrate providing energy for modern life. I don't care if my ancestors struggled and suffered and made it through long, dark, cold, harsh winters going keto, because I'm trying to compete in the 400-meter race in 4 months' time, and I'm not going to model my ancestral example literally. That's stupid. We're trying to progress and perform better than. I'll kick any caveman's ass in the 400 meters, I promise, who's ever lived, because they didn't care about that stuff. They just wanted to survive the long, dark, cold, harsh winter. And I have a sticky note on my wall that I've had for many years, and it was a quote from Dr. Perlmutter, highly respected physician and author. Don't eat fruit in the wintertime, because our ancestral example is that was a time for fat storage and less glycemic ability and all these things. And it's so spot on and valid through evolutionary anthropology. But then, as I look at the quote a lot, I'm thinking, last winter, Southwest Airlines had a flash sale for $80 one-way ticket to Hawaii. So we went to Hawaii 4 times last winter. Wow. And I was doing hot, sweaty hikes and going to the farmer's market and slamming the mangoes and the pineapples during winter. So it's like, what effing winter are we talking about now with these bright lights on us and our bright lights and our screens? We can disengage from the ancestral example when appropriate in pursuit of peak performance and longevity today. So that's been another awakening for me, not to be locked in obsessed with the caveman example.
Well, I think that rigid dogmatism, that's part of it, just having an open mind. But I also think our modern day lifestyles contribute to why we don't tolerate certain types of foods, whether it's chronic antibiotic use, exposure to estrogen mimicking chemicals, the lack of high quality sleep, and just being physically sedentary. We're not living anything at all similar to where we used to live. We just have become a little comfortable. I don't want to say a derogatory term. We're just becoming these human beings that are going completely against the grain of the way our bodies are designed to thrive.
I call them flabby, floppy Mr. Softies.
Oh, I was going to say,
page.
We're becoming little blobs. Truly. And it's unfortunate, because that's not the way we're designed to thrive. And it's so sad to me. It's not until, we get out of the United States and we're traveling with our family and we're like, just don't see the amount of obesity that you do here. And it's so concerning, because that's the norm now. We just think that's normal.
You ever seen those pictures of the Jersey Shore
from the 1970s?
1947 picture of the people on the beach.
And
the beach is just packed with people.
And everyone's thin.
You can't find an obese person in a photo of 8,000 people.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just...
There's a photo from the 1970s, and I did a talk this year where I put that, and then there was a photo superimposed of the 2010s with some very heavy people, and I took some flack on social media from one or two people who got triggered, and I was like, I'm just trying to explain to people we are heading in the wrong direction. What do we need to do to course correct? And on so many different levels, I think our modern day lifestyles are contributing, whether it's exposure to blue light and sitting at night, people just assume, I just have to put the component on my iPhone or my iPad or my computer.
And I can keep going.
Right, exactly. My husband said, I don't have to wear blue blockers. I was like, if you're going to be on your computer, yes, you should. Because I know I'm sensitive to blue light. Totally sensitive to it.
I have it right next to my computer, and most of the time I forget.
Yeah, sitting there.
But I like your, rule of thumb as far as what diet is good for you is to see how you feel.
Yep.
That's really the bottom line, because it's hard. It's so hard. Even if you do a genetic test, I guess it could give you some glimpse of what may be good for you. But, I think our body is very complex. So just looking at the genes and some correlations probably doesn't tell you the full picture of what's going on in your body. So eventually you just, look at, is everything functioning beautifully, eating what you're eating? that probably is the bottom line.
Yeah, it's funny. This summer I had nutrigenomic testing done.
Yeah.
And the first thing the woman said to me was, "Do you tolerate fatty meat?" And I was like, "No." And she said, "I can explain why."
Wow.
And so I was so validating because in my family, ribeye is king, and I get a lot of flack because I'm like, listen, I don't feel good if I eat a duck fat fry. I mean, anything, lard, tallow, I really do better with plant-based fats and lean meat and fish and chicken and things like that. And so now I feel like I can say it's genetically predisposed. It's not just in my head. But yeah, I think sometimes it can validate maybe the way maybe connections that you're making about your relationship with food or how your body feels.
Right, you're bringing in the modern science to explain certain things.
Yes.
Yeah, it told me that I had a deficiency in salivary enzyme amylase.
Interesting.
Yeah, which makes me more prone to insulin resistance and blood sugar spikes because I can't digest the carbs, the starch. And then, so my body cannot be primed to produce insulin.
Yep.
So by the time it's absorbed with this massive amount of carbohydrate, that's too late. My blood sugars are already spiked.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's solving some pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah, that's so important.
I wonder if that sensitivity is buried under a mountain of processed food and sitting around for most people where they can't even relate to what it feels like to have an omelet versus the cereal, orange juice, toast, and sugar on top. Like a smoker doesn't have as sensitive lungs as I do when I'm breathing, someone smoking 3 doors down on a hotel balcony. I'm like, who the hell's smoking?
Exactly. It's like, that's
right,
gross.
one step at a time.
Yeah, that's right. One step at a time. So I guess if you could just clean up a little bit and then start to be able to assess whether fasting works for you or doesn't work for you, how can you tell? You're buried. You're underneath the avalanche.
That's such a good point. And I think it really speaks to the fact that I think for most people, they don't lean into how they feel. They're just kind of going through the motions. And I think for, those of us in this space, we're really leaning into, okay, what's my body trying to communicate? What the beauty of the N of one is really trying to determine what works best for you, your body, your lifestyle.
I do wonder if there's a wuss factor there because I'm so sensitive to my sleep needs. And if I don't get 8.5 to 9 hours, I feel like hell and I have to take 2 naps, if we're traveling. And I mean, I got jet lag traveling from California to Arizona last week where that first afternoon, I was like, man, I'm not feeling well. I'm getting a headache. And it's like, I was that way as an athlete too because I purposefully went in that direction where I needed to assess whether this little tweak on my knee was something I needed to watch out for super carefully every step of that 8-mile run and so on. And then the next day it was the right shoulder, whatever. So could it be that, could we take this overboard, I think, when we're talking to people that were working the night shift for 11 years and doing the triple duty?
I think it remains to be seen.
I'm working on that too. It's a work in progress.
Yeah, I just know my jet lag is worse when I come out to the West Coast than it is when I fly east, like if I go to Europe or Africa. So like I will struggle. Like I can tell right now, like my body, like right now my body's telling me, you're not supposed to be like doing this right now. It's like thinking it's meal time. It's, we're getting close to dinner time. It's amazing. I mean, but I've only been on the West Coast for one day.
Right,
so.
And I see these badasses that just steamroll over everything.
I'm fine if I go east. I'm terrible if I go west. Like I've been to Hawaii twice, and I don't think I'll ever go back. Just because I could not function with the jet lag.
Yeah, that's that's a lot of time zones for East Coast.
It is. I was like, I don't think I need to do that again. I've twice check it off the box.
Ladies, that was a riveting conversation. We went in so many directions. Usually I record an intro and we talk, then we talk about protein, then we talk about this, and now I'm like, all right, we talk about, Tiger of Beijing's father ripping up her notes, and a 13-day fast, a new record, Guinness Book of Records, never to be broken by herself. Thank you so much for watching, listening. It was great fun. Let's give our appropriate plugs.
You can find one of my podcasts called Everyday Wellness. It is available everywhere, as well as the Intermittent Fasting podcast that I co-host with Melanie Avalon. You can find me on social media, Cynthia_Thurlow_ on Instagram. Be forewarned, I'm snarky on Twitter. And I have a free Facebook group. I get in trouble. Free Facebook group called The Intermittent Fasting Lifestyle / my name. And of course, my book, The Intermittent Fasting Transformation, which I would love for you to check out.
Joy Kong. This is going to go on the Joy Kong podcast as well as the B.rad podcast. And we can learn more about you from...
Well, my YouTube channel, Joy Kong MD, I have a lot of educational videos about mostly about stem cell therapy, because there's so much misinformation out there, and people are so confused. Actually, even medical doctors are very confused. So it's a good resource. And I also talk a little bit about ketamine therapy, a little bit about peptide therapy. So I do this, kind of an integrative approach in my clinic using some of the, very new innovative modalities. And then my Instagram is Dr_Joy_Kong. And that's most of my, my clinic is here in Uplift Longevity Center, where we really put everything to work, all these new modalities I've gleaned and got excited about, and to get people over some really tough health challenges, and also help people stay really healthy. And I wrote a book, Tiger of Beijing, and it's in the process being made into a movie, and that'll be an exciting journey. So I'm looking at putting all the content from the YouTube onto a podcast format, so I can make this more accessible to more people. So excited to meet amazing people like these two, and then help bringing more goodness to the world.
Thank you, everybody.